We're going to have a few questions to the panel that we've prepared, and that will obviously open up some kind of conversation with you guys, and then from that point we will, just open up the floor to other questions. Our lovely Mary is going to come round with a microphone to make sure that we can hear what you're actually saying. So if you do have a question, if you at the point where we raise that out to the audience, if you could just raise your hand and we'll send Mary round with a microphone to make sure that we can actually hear what you guys are saying. So I think that I'd like to start with Nick, if that's okay. Nick, crypto and Web3 is probably the most non-geographical reliant sector in history. People literally can work from anywhere as a technology is in most cases virtual. It's an opportunity for employers, governments, etc. to attract more digital nomads to Scotland as a place to live and work. And secondly, as a follow-up question, what should employers, schools, universities, governments, these sorts of things be looking to do to stop the movement in the other way, so the traditional brain drain to London and further afield?
Yes, it's a good question. So we started the lockdown with 9 employees. All 9 of those employees were based in Scotland, and I think we're 60 people now, so not massive, but a decent size. And our team is spread between Scotland broadly, maybe about 20 people, London, sort of general other places in England, Slovenia, the Canary Islands, Lisbon, Berlin. So we've taken the chance to hire talent, which was honestly too expensive to hire in Scotland. A lot of the kind of financial services development talent gets hoovered up by a couple of large financial services players in Glasgow who can pay a lot more money than we can as a startup. So we've had to take that approach, and it's been beneficial. The flip is we've had access to people in London who there's no way we would have had a chance to hire had it not been for the pandemic. So we've been able to attract those people, and they can work from home and not have to slog into London on the tube every day. And they're very sticky employees and giving people freedom. Challenges with that are you have to be very, very careful how you hire. You have to hire really self-managing people. We made a load of mistakes over the first year, and then we've got a lot better at hiring remotely and running those remote teams over time. And someone asked me the question the other day, would you now, all things being equal, if you had a big pot of money, would you create an office in Edinburgh and have everybody come in every day? And the answer is definitely no, because the specialist skills you need, particularly on the blockchain engineering side, just don't exist in any one particular geographical place. But they could do in Scotland because of Edinburgh Uni School of Informatics, Napier, Cryptography, Strathclyde, my alma mater, Glasgow. There's lots of promising stuff going on there. How do you get those people to stay? I guess the carrot will always be the wages on offer, either at the big incumbents in Scotland or to go to London and work for heavily funding companies. So that is a critical challenge, and that is a funding-based challenge. It's one of the most depressing things about the Logan report and all this stuff is it doesn't really address the funding challenge. It's all like a 20-year time horizon. Doesn't address the lack of funding for businesses in Scotland to be able to pay people properly to stay. The flip is we can definitely attract people here. So our CTO, fantastic guy, Slovenian guy, moved to Edinburgh, loves living here, has bought a house. He's committed to being here, for the foreseeable. But that process could and should be easier. And again, small country with a decent amount of control over its own destiny, albeit not full. We should be double downing on that and making ourselves as attractive as a Lisbon or a Berlin, and making it easier for people to choose to move here, because it's a great place to live despite the occasional issues with the weather.
Yeah. And I'd like to open that question up to both Erica and Iona as well. I mean, do you have any kind of sort of comment on kind of how you can kind of attract and keep that talent, or maintain talent in the place of which it's kind of generated in the first place, or how do you attract that talent to a small country like Scotland?
I think to answer that, I mean, I work at a law firm in the biggest crypto asset team in the UK, and the most frequent and first question the guys get is, where should we base? And it isn't necessarily how do we base in the UK, it's where should we base. And I'd say a lot comes down to regulation and how friendly to the industry is a regulation. England has been disastrous. They seem to be doing everything they can to send everyone away. Don't even think that's an exaggeration. So if Scotland has a degree of independence, and it's not even so much necessarily having super friendly regulation as having clear regulation. This is what you can do, this is what you can't do, then companies can work with that. Most companies want to have that clarity, and the problem in England, for example, is that there's no clarity whatsoever. So companies don't know where they stand, so they're in limbo. So if Scotland were to say, you can do this, you can't do this, friendly or no, that would be a massive, massive help. And then it goes down to really, I mean, as Nick said, how companies treat people. People don't want to have to go into the office every day. They want the option to maybe do that if that's what they want. But it's giving certain degrees of freedom that I think especially people in tech expect to have. You wouldn't get me or probably most people going to an office 9 to 5 every day, and you've got to be there. It just wouldn't happen.
And Nick, it looks like you had something else to say
Yeah,
about
I just
that.
wanted to say that there's, you know, you don't want to be negative about this stuff. There's some kind of encouraging sign. No, I was as well, don't worry. But there's some encouraging signs of life around that. This Scottish Enterprise, FinTech Scotland initiative around the Blockchain Collective. So trying to pull together academia, industry. The government appears to have identified it as an area of economic potential. But it's about pace. So it's not a 20-year time horizon, it's about doing it quickly. And look, there are blueprints globally to see how this can work. Look at the way Lisbon's been able to suck in development talent and establish itself as a hub. Look at the way Dubai's been able to set itself up as a hub for regulation. So I think that for me, what you hope is that you end up with somebody in innovation and finance in the Scottish Government who can say, we're gonna be that one of those independent hubs which attracts people with tax breaks to set up, incentives for people from other countries to come and work here and get visas easily, and pour some paraffin on this nice little fire that we've got just starting on.
And Iona.
Yeah, I second everything that was said. I'm going to reference one of my kind of generous jobs, which is I'm a mentor for the largest UK accelerator, Outlier Ventures. They're a venture capital firm, but also the largest UK accelerator, probably amongst the biggest globally. And I mentor over a couple of hundreds of startups, well, let's just say 200 startups every year in various cohorts. I can tell you that less than 1% establish their operating jurisdiction out of the UK. And many of them are UK-based projects, and they move elsewhere. I do agree that there needs to be regulatory clarity. I mean, if you look at what's in place at the moment, FCA requires you to register for an AML and KYC license. That's nothing, right? Of course, there's this consultation around how you can welcome more crypto projects to operate in the UK and what should be done in terms of regulatory clarity. But there's an additional problem. There's no access to professional services. Many of these crypto projects choose to operate in a different jurisdiction because they do not have access to banks. They do not have access to other types of professional services like accounting firms and advisors on how they should tax their revenue, etc. And so, to me, I don't get it. I was against Brexit since I first heard about the referendum, and I was in politics back then, and I saw the damage that was done when the British Conservatives extracted themselves from the European People's Party group. I was there for the historic final meeting that they had, right? They were part of the largest political group. They center-right. They went out because Cameron had promised internally that they would get out and create their own group. And so from the beginning, it seemed like a very stupid idea. I still think it's one of the most stupid things that has ever occurred, and I'm happy to have endless conversations on why that is. But at least if there was ever a silver lining, I don't get it. Why isn't the UK becoming a pro-crypto jurisdiction? It's an easy way to attract capital. It's an easy way, well, if done correctly, to get tax money into for public funding usage. Let's not forget, UK has one of the oldest, if not the oldest, financial systems in the world. And I get that it's difficult to disrupt it, and crypto is a disruptive force. But there's also that capacity and the talent and the financial know-how in terms of welcoming crypto. So like I said, I don't get it. UK regulators, policymakers, wake up and embrace crypto, because quite frankly, that's the only immediate chance you have to get some money in, get some capital, and a variety of projects, and allow you to have a normal, strike-free lifestyle. So again, and I say that publicly, I say that in discussion with regulators, the main problem is that there's no support from mainstream politicians. So even if you have a few people, and Lisa will join us later, and she's been a promoter of crypto, it's not enough. You need to have a mass political movement that supports crypto, and it's just being pragmatic. Focus on what can be beneficial, and there are many things.
And Jess, just as a young professional within both the crypto and the we are Iona. As a young professional within both accountancy and the crypto sphere, kind of what's your comment on that?
Yeah, I think regulatory clarity is a really important one, because ultimately if people know what the rules are. There was a really good analogy that I heard someone say, where they basically said if you have loads of kids in a playground and there's no fence, then they'll all play in the middle of the playground. But as soon as you put a fence up, they can go right up to the edge of the fence. And so actually by creating boundaries, you create a kind of safety net, and you create clarity where people know how far they can push it. And so I think that regulatory clarity is really important. But I just had a kind of follow-up question for everyone that I think, especially after what you were saying, is actually, like, a lot of the problem is we don't have political support because a lot of politicians maybe only read a few kind of like more old-fashioned newspapers or like mainstream publications. And the stuff that they see about crypto is often quite negative. And even especially during the bull market, I'm sure loads of you saw, even fairly mainstream people within crypto, they were all popping champagne bottles at Grand Prix, and they were all kind of like having this very exuberant, there's this saying in crypto, like if someone's not investing in crypto, they say NGMI, which is not going to make it. So there's almost like a kind of mocking tone where actually there was this quite negative perception of crypto that was created. And if we want this new kind of, if we want politicians to embrace crypto, it needs to make sense for them electorally. So I'd be really interested to hear about how you guys think we can create a more positive image for crypto, and we can create something that is much more palatable to regulators, and something that electorally they can get away with and actually benefit from promoting more crypto.
I mean, Erica, would you like to start with that?
Okay, then
What regulators need to...
How you package it in a way that is sellable from a political capital perspective, right? That's what
it's a good question. At least in London, we're often meeting with politicians and regulators, and a lot of it is starting from basics, going through the explanation of this is what it is, this is what it isn't. So I guess my experience of crypto, you've got Bitcoin and you've got Ethereum, and then you've got tens of thousands of other cryptocurrencies which vary from, having a value to a total and utter pass, and then you've got scams, and you've got stable coins, and you've got this whole big thing. And I think a large part of it is getting the understanding clearly about what the differences are. And one of the main problems I see is regulators will go, it's just... There was a recent quote, I think it was the UK Treasury released a report saying, we want to rule it like gambling because it's all volatile and it's all risky. So, yes, parts of it are risky, and then you've got another entire section of this industry that doesn't need to be volatile and isn't about that. You've got payments that are used as micropayments, or to be used as in-game currencies, or as loyalty points, or as rewards, or as digital certificates, and it's just missing the point that you've got this whole technology that has a lot of use cases for good that isn't anything to do with price of joke coin goes up, or Elon Musk did this tweet, therefore price of whatever has gone up, which is a lot of what gets focused on and misses the point of the entire rest of the industry. So I guess from my side it would be engaging with a lot of the companies that are doing a lot of good stuff, like be that safe custody, or be that working out micropayments, or be that getting digital wallets to people that have never had access to banking before, and speaking with those companies and seeing what are the problems, how can we sort this, rather than just bundling everything into one big pool of everything is a volatile scam, which in my experience too much happens of.
Nick, do you want to say? Okay, thank you. Jess, I attended the Abu Dhabi Grand Prix. I didn't drink champagne, but I'm a huge Formula One fan. I support Lewis Hamilton, always will. I just wanted to say, if we look at the parameters, crypto is primarily a social media phenomenon. Without social media, we wouldn't be here talking about it. The fact that it's a social media phenomenon comes with the negative and the positives. The negatives being the fact that, there's always constant focus on the scandals, on the exaggerated, extravagant things, because that's what people want to hear, right? I mean, as much as I love my ZK presentation, right, and talk to you about zero knowledge, I'm pretty sure it's much more exciting to hear about the scammers and the hit, right? So this is how human nature works. So I can tell you, having been in both politics and TradFi, the exact same things happen, if not worse, but no one knows about it. So there you have it. It's a negative side of being always in the spotlight, and people are not attracted to learning about the positive things, and this is what I think we should focus on accentuating. In terms of politicians, I started my presentation basically saying that Web3 is a user-centric phenomenon, and it empowers communities, and it allows direct access to the internet economy. If this is not populist, not populist in a good way, if this is not something that all politicians across the ideological spectrum, if they cannot import this and adjust it to their political messaging, then I don't know what they can import. So it's, on one hand, an easy sell. I mean, you, for once, have a movement, a technological, social, financial movement that empowers the individual. So the fact that you, as a jurisdiction, do not offer the flexible parameters or inviting parameters for that ecosystem to flourish, I mean, I don't understand. I don't understand how you, as a politician, can explain that. And another thing, there are so many tools, there's so many research, there's so many research and reports. So just last week, last week, Circle and Uniswap Labs issued a research paper analyzing how, via combining on-chain FX and automated market making, you can decrease remittance costs by 80%. There you go. I mean, I can become a politician overnight just saying that. And so there are ways. I don't think politicians have understood that this can actually be used as solid political capital. And part of the reason being that because of the bear market, you don't see, there's not a predominant tax base of retail users and wholesale users alike. The moment that changes, so the moment that you see, hey, here's a crypto growing taxable base, then politicians will pay more attention to it, I think.
Yeah, I'll probably just add, it's a huge amount of variance kind of globally. So this is probably a little bit simplistic, but countries with very large, powerful central banks equals terrified of a financial system that's out with their control. Countries that don't have kind of reserve-backed central banks, pretty receptive to crypto and Bitcoin. And I think depending on where you are, the political feeling towards it is very different. And it's very interesting if you look at the UN, the IMF, World Bank, generally pretty receptive towards the idea that blockchain and cryptocurrency, particularly for things like remittances, can bring. The resistance is largely coming from incumbent interests. So you have, again, look at what's going on with the SEC in the US, this kind of sea change in the UK, where certainly the old guard who are probably exiting at some point in the next few years Bank of England, FCA, exec, non-exec, exco, who just don't believe Bitcoin's a thing. They just don't think it has any value, and they will not change that opinion. There'll be a changing of the guard, and that will move. So there's a lot of entrenched opinion, and there's a lot of this is the way we've always done things, which actually is only the way we've done things for the last 50 years or so. But it just happens to suit the people that are involved in not having the status quo moved. And nobody likes having their cheese moved. And there is a big part of that, and that's why it's been embraced in countries where the cheese is pretty smelly and doesn't work very well, and it's fine for it to be moved. And it's where, again, in more independent jurisdictions, Switzerland, Singapore, Abu Dhabi, Dubai, it's been easier to create these regulatory frameworks. So back to the whole piece, that's the UK, Scotland's opportunity is to, whether it's strict like Singapore, whether it's Dubai, whether it's less stringent like Dubai.
Fluid.
You've got to have some form of rules and some form of rules for people to play in. And back to the education piece, it is an education piece, but the people at the top of the financial system in the UK in general are not going to change. They're not going to change their mind. We have to kind of wait, and we have to work with the people that are coming through that do. And listen, the big driver is, and the reason why we are having a lot of success with big financial institutions is they know that nobody under 35 is buying any of their products anymore. They've got an aging audience. Those people are all buying things that I don't really understand: shrink wrap sneakers, playing cards, alternative investments, things that they believe have value. Because it's all made up, right? Value is in the eye of the beholder. So we're in this flux. We're in this flux moment where it makes a lot more sense in other places, and you have incumbents holding on very, very tightly to their kind of grip of power in places like the UK. What we have to get back to, and it's one of the things you said, Ian, in your initial presentation, is working out how the two systems can play nicely together. And that's the UK's that's the real secret sauce for the UK, is how do we become the place where what's still the world's second biggest financial hub can play nicely and become one of the biggest crypto or DeFi hubs as well, and how those two systems can play together. It's a big education piece, and we're unlucky. And there are no anyone a politician in the room? We're unlucky.
Don't use my slogans.
No, we're unlucky in that we have a particularly unintelligent set
I think it applies across the board.
Yeah. We're in a situation probably driven by social media that most of the good people are not in that space at the moment. So
one practicality just to add on that is anybody good in regulation or law enforcement, they don't get massively high salaries compared to what a tech company can pay. So anybody that shows intelligence or forward thinking or skill gets poached just like that. So the turnover that we see, for example, in the FCA, it's insane. And that's a reality of it, that anybody good will be poached by tech and offered 2, 3, 4 times the salary.
Can I comment on what Nick was saying? Nick, I agree with you fully when we talk about retail investors. I don't agree with you fully when we talk about institutional investors, because if you look at crypto adoption in various jurisdictions in Western democracies, including the UK, there's a huge institutional adoption wave. So you cannot say that just because the financial system is rigid and the regulators have a lot of power that it doesn't permeate. It does. But I do agree on the retail user side. I also wanted to point out that actually, HMT, the committee in the House of Commons that issued that gambling report, the FCA, they're not all working seamlessly, and there's no, how should I put it, seamless collaboration between these entities. There's actually a very subversive power play game happening there, and I think that will benefit crypto ultimately. And I want to tell you, I was still at Citigroup when the first retail CBDC discussion started. Forget about wholesale CBDCs that are easy to accept by everyone. By everyone, I mean every bank because it profits them. But when retail CBDCs came into discussion, all financial institutions were against it, against their own regulator, remember that. And they lobbied heavily against it because if designed as initially proposed, which is why later on in all of the communication around retail CBDCs, we know that there's a cap in terms of how much money you can deposit with the central bank as a user. So in the initial design, the commercial banking sector would have been left out, which prompted every single bank operating out of the UK and elsewhere to go heavily and then lobby against this. So let's not forget that just because entities are at power or in government or that they work together and they have the same interest at heart. They don't. And like I said, out of this power play game, I think crypto will benefit because there's no central entity really supporting it. So.
It's one of the, again, it's kind of like digital ID and a number of other areas. It's somewhere where Scotland should be punching above its weight. 506 million people. Massive history in financial services, a lot of highly skilled knowledge workers, incredible universities. It's where Scotland should be aiming kind of a bit higher within the devolved system that there is. It should be looking to punch above its weight in this space, 100%. And it is competition, and why couldn't it be Edinburgh and Glasgow rather than London? That's the hub for the UK.
I mean, I'm assuming that that's probably kind of posed quite a lot of questions to the audience, so that's been quite a sort of formatted conversation. So if we don't mind, I'm going to open the floor up to some audience questions, and then we'll go back to some kind of formatted questions after that. Does anyone we've got a question in the back here. Mari, would you mind? Thank you. Nick, do you mind relinquishing your microphone and sharing with Erica? Is that okay? The gentleman just at the back over here. Thank you.
Give me a few minutes. I'm in heels.
So originally, every user on the blockchain was just anonymous, more or less. But now there are these solutions for decentralized identity. So I'm just maybe a question it's a technical question, maybe for Ion in particular. So can that help us to make more applications which are basically legally compliant by basically adding identity on top of this decentralized system, so that we can show, okay, these transactions on the blockchain follow laws, and that way balance the decentralization with legal compliance. Thank you.
Yes, we totally can. And that's why I referenced zero-knowledge technologies, and especially the zero-knowledge proof part, because it allows identifying a wallet, an entity behind a wallet or a multitude of wallets, without revealing the identity of that entity or person. So yes, I think we still need to scale them, but I think their prerequisites are there and the building blocks are there, and we can definitely do that. And I think it's also important for regulators to understand that. So there is a way to track nefarious activity via decentralized self-sovereign identity solutions built on top of zero-knowledge proofs, for instance, but there is a way to do it. And it can still be pseudonymous. I was actually discussing with someone in the hallway before, post-presentations before the panel. And we were talking about, okay, people do not understand that crypto, as Erica was pointing out, is not anonymous anymore. It actually never was. I mean, Bitcoin was pseudonymous from the outset. How do we balance that out with regulation? And I think what I referenced was the fact that if you look at some of the best known decentralized protocols, I mentioned them, Aave, Compound, Maker, yes, they are decentralized, they are run by a community, but however, you still know who's behind them. You still can associate a person or a group of people behind these top-tier blue-chip protocols. So I think we will have to find a balance, compromise on decentralization, full decentralization and censorship resistance if we want a regulated ecosystem. You cannot do it. You have the optionality to go potentially full anonymous if these ZK technologies advance, and they will. But I think if we want to have a mass onboarding ecosystem, then we need to find that balance and say to the regulators, hey, these are the tools that you can use to track without actually knowing the user, unless there's something wrong that you need to intervene on. And going back to simplify my answer to your question, yes, it's going to be, I guess your question was, can we have a regulated ecosystem where users still maintain privacy and we can scale those applications? Yes, we can, but it takes time, which is why, again, I come back to saying that regulators should stay out of it for now. Let the industry develop standards, let the industry understand what's wrong, what isn't, what works, what doesn't. And then we're happy to collaborate, basically.
Nick, Erica, have either of you got anything to add to that?
No, yeah, we're we're currently fighting with the FATF guidelines on the travel rule at the moment, which in their kind of unintended consequence state say that the sender and recipient of any transaction should be publicly available to anybody. Now that is not what they meant when they created that rule, but it kind of is it just shows you the kind of lack of understanding or the appreciation of what they're actually saying. So every transaction sent between anyone should be publicly available to everyone else. That's that's kind of completely insane with a disclosure of who those people is. So zero knowledge proofs, 100%. That is, and packaging it up so that you prove your ID once. It's packaged up inside a token, which nobody else has visibility on apart from necessary law enforcement, if it's being used for a hitman, as Erica was recommending earlier.
You're associated with hitman for life.
Or drugs, sorry. Yeah, look, and I think that's probably the way that it can be solved with smart contracts and tokenization and zero knowledge proof. But again, it's just this, it's a brilliant illustration of the struggle of regulators trying to get their head around it probably too early and unintended consequences, and then the industry going, holy shit, what do we actually do with this practically to be compliant? You know, it's really great.
I agree, and sorry, Erica, just a second. I think it goes back to what I was saying before. The regulators are used to applying a model that they know, right? They apply it in TradFi. They're applying when they regulate other kind of established industry segments. It doesn't work. And the traveler, so for instance, in MiCA, and it's me saying, hey, MiCA has some, I don't know, encouraging paragraphs in it. So for instance, in MiCA, the travel rule only applies when you interact from an unhosted wallet to a centralized exchange. Unhosted wallet to unhosted wallet, it doesn't cover those transactions. First of all, because it's hard to actually implement it. It's not impossible, but it's hard. So yeah, I do agree. Like I said, they are programmed to implement things in the way that they've done for the past 20, 30 years. And it's just obvious that these systems do not work to regulate something as new and as different as crypto.
I think to add sort of a can of worms to the argument, technology allows already for anyone to see that, yes, this person is over 18. One doesn't need to see their date of birth, their exact age, their address, all of that we currently have now. So completely yes to your question. And to throw the can of worms into the answer, I would argue that is one of the biggest risks of CBDCs, so central bank digital currencies that most central banks are now trying to bring in, and they're effectively a tool to get all data and entirely control populations, because what you've got there is a digital payment that's entirely synced to an identity, and then there's already been trials in the way that programmable money works, is you can see exactly, well, stop this user making a payment, or this user can only pay up to X amount, or this user can pay that and not that. And the problem is PayPal already tried to do it. They had a policy, I believe it got re-implemented. If you say something we don't like on social media, we'll deduct $2,500 out of your account. And that's a core risk with CBDCs if payments go into entirely central bank run programmable money with access to all of your data, which is what the governments are trying to do.
They are doing in
Well,
China
they are
already.
doing it,
The
but-
digital yuan is up and running, and that's the reason why they kicked all of the private cryptocurrency projects out of the country. I think, and I'm not a proponent of CBDCs at all, but she just said good. But there are different designs. The ones that you presented is the most extreme one. It's implemented in China, no surprise there. But I think because of the pressure, there are other types of design that allow for less intrusion of the central bank into...
the will of the government and the goodwill of the government.
I mean, there is an element of centralization, and they're not implemented yet. So they're still discussing the designs. I think what's important is that we involve crypto projects in that discussion, not just banks and the regulators. That's the problem, right? So why do TradFi folks lobby for something that it's actually not their product or ethos or, yeah.
I know you were talking about self-regulation a bit earlier, and it's something that I think is a lot of people in crypto say, oh, well, we'll just regulate ourselves and then it will all be fine. But actually we have seen with FTX, with Genesis, with all of the kind of scandals that we've seen, that self-regulation to this point hasn't worked. So how do we create a more kind of robust and actually real self-regulation? And we've seen it in a lot of industries in Scotland. The alcohol industry is actually a really good example. They get away quite lightly in terms of advertising regulations because they very successfully self-regulate. And so it's not impossible, but I would be really interested to hear what you'll think about how we can promote real, genuine self-regulation in crypto.
Okay, you start.
I guess you're right. I mean, one of the interesting things, and I'll give you this from the kind of we've seen this coming at the kind of the space owning its carbon footprint angle, is that it's not because of the nature of the kind of the libertarian, decentralized background to the space. It's not been designed as a space where consensus has become, where consensus among lots of the big key players has been a natural thing to happen. However, I'd say there's been a sea change in that over the last 2 years. Some of it as a response to US regulatory tightening up, some of it as a response to scrutiny, some of it as a response to just some better people being involved in the industry and some of the kind of idiots, self-selecting and leaving. So actually I think the industry is moving towards that type of consensus. We should do this as a group and we should do this voluntarily without being kind of, put in a headlock and forced to do it. So I think that's a natural progression of an industry which is realistically, I know everyone says 2011, it's 5 years old, right? It's an industry that's realistically five or 6 years old. So the starting of that process to self-regulate, I mean, it's Web2, there's still no general self-regulation amongst the large Web2 companies. They kind of do whatever the fuck they want, and until they're told not to by somebody. So the fact that there is some consensus and a movement towards that is I think quite positive. And again, back to that the decarbonisation piece, it's been pretty amazing being part of something which you were maybe part of one or two voices in, and there's now hundreds of companies, signed up to trying to, do their bit. And so I think you're right. It feels like there's a direction of travel which is being driven by all those sorts of things, but a way to go. Cooperation is the only way.
I wouldn't have a clue is the answer.
So just to clarify, because I wasn't clear before, I only mean self-regulation when it comes to DeFi. Entities with centralization element, yes, definitely regulate them. I actually think this is the means by which we can regulate DeFi as well. If we focus on the interfaces, the centralized interfaces that allow users access to DeFi protocols and assets. So I'm not against regulating CeFi. I'm not against regulating crypto products, instruments, and processes that are similar to what happens in TradFi. I'm actually in favor of doing that. And when it comes to DeFi, in a way, it's good that there's regulatory pressure on the industry because it forces DeFi, basically, and the developers mainly, to respond, to figure out what is regulatable, how should we go about this. And one of the first things that has come out is okay, let's focus on suggesting to the regulators that they focus on the interface layer, and if it's centralized, even better. Let's tell the regulators that we can develop self-standards in terms of user protection, because the developers know best what cybersecurity protocols they can put in place, what audits they can put in place. So it's a process. I'm not saying it's flawless, and there is a risk that the industry just does not, do anything to comply with, even with the self-imposed rules. But I think we want to expand. We want to onboard masses. And we know that user safety is paramount to do that. So I do have trust that the industry will come with some self-standing standards, and I hope they will, right? And another thing, so it's important to react. Tell the regulators, like I said, do not touch protocol. Like it's impossible for you to apply, again, the same mechanics and say the developers are financial intermediaries. We can actually regulate code. That's impossible, and it's the biggest hit innovation can take if that happens. So yes, just to be clear, I'm only saying that DeFi should self-regulate temporarily, not forever.
Was there any other audience questions just now? Yes, Mari, just over here, please. Thank you.
A question on demographics, because Bitcoin has been around for a while, so all the young people that were around when it first came to prominence publicly, maybe, I don't know, 2011, 13, that's about a decade. So all those people will grow up, and then they will go into the industry, and then some of them will become regulators. So what's your, and actually, an example that illustrates the point, so Bitcoin is now more, I don't know, like 500 billion, maybe a trillion, that type of level, and investable gold is, I don't know, 3 trillion, that type of stuff. So then the ratio of the two is actually staggering. It's only like a few times fold. And actually, if you look at the ETF flow in the market, and if you look at the ETF flows in the gold ETFs and the Bitcoin ETFs, the younger demographic, I'm not saying that it's even rational because Bitcoin is very volatile, but almost treats it as a proxy for safe haven, like a low vol defensive type of approach, and which is not visible in any older demographic. By older, I mean over 30 years old. So the behavior of a consumer changes dramatically, going to Gen Z and even younger. So then what do you think going forward will happen to the regulation when all the people that were crypto native in a few years will actually become the regulators?
That's I think, I don't see it like that. Why do you think that people that are native users of crypto, Bitcoin or other type of crypto, will end up becoming regulators?
How that will change. So the question is, so currently we have many people that I see, for example, that have no idea how crypto works.
I think they've gotten better through time. Yeah.
Yeah. But if more and more people actually grew up with the cryptocurrency, right? So a lot of people were aware 10 years ago that crypto exists, to some extent. So all those people will grow up and they will go into the role of a regulator. The question is, how do you think that will actually change the approach to regulation of crypto? Because in my mind, it should be very positive.
But you reiterated the same thing. You said they will go into the role of a regulator. So you're actually assuming that some of them, I actually don't think so. Because why? It's crypto.
Because if most people who are actually native crypto will avoid going into the role of regulation, will get even worse regulation. Because there will be people who actually don't understand crypto at all, right?
Yeah, in a second. So yeah, I don't think that crypto native users necessarily need to become regulators in order for the ecosystem to be regulated correctly. I think that there are so many tools currently that can be deployed. It's just about willingness. If the regulators understood they don't need to be crypto native, or maybe they should have a few people in the team, crypto native folks, degens that understand how the system operates. But I actually think that the tools will be sufficient irrespective of the profile of the regulator. And I think irrespective of whether or not we have crypto-native regulators being in the regulatory ecosystem 10 or 15 years from now, I don't think that affects how the regulation will be designed, mainly because the industry is now has for the past couple of years woken up to the fact that we need to lobby, we need to advocate, and so potentially convert some of the regulators into understanding how it's best to regulate the space. And in terms of what you were saying earlier, and the demographic and the behaviors, it's interesting. It's adjacent to what you were mentioning, but have you seen the fact that retail investors now mimic DeFi behaviors in TradFi? So for instance, people taking the money out of their banks to invest in T-bills and money market funds, that wasn't a thing 3-4 years ago, but DeFi prompted that. So yes, I do agree that there's a new behavior that it's being enabled, and to the benefit of people. I doubt these people, and Jess can talk about it because she's actually a representative of that generation. I doubt she will want to become a regulator, or maybe yes, I don't know, maybe I'm wrong.
No, I don't plan on becoming a regulator anytime soon. But I do think it's obviously, as a young person, I think it is a really interesting point that actually it's not necessarily just crypto, because I think if I asked most of my friends, they wouldn't know what crypto was that much. And I think it's very easy when you're a crypto person to get in this bubble of, oh, young people, every young person ever knows loads about crypto. We're all like DeFi legends and we can like code and like be straight on chain, when actually most young people don't. And there are, it's quite interesting actually, if you look at the statistics on the demographics of crypto users, actually the biggest demographic is 35 to 55-year-olds. So it's about 40%. Yeah. So it's actually about
Still in our prime.
About 40% of these people that are more likely to use crypto. But I think it's actually more to do with sort of like Web2 like fluency for people who are not sure what Web2 is. It basically means like using the internet and kind of the internet of things. So the fact that you have a smartwatch and your watch connects with your phone and your phone connects with your fridge and you can turn on your washing machine from 10 miles away. And actually, if you're very fluent with using the internet, then it's much easier to get into crypto, because actually creating a MetaMask account is not that difficult. And so for people now, even in their kind of 40s, 50s, that demographic is actually just, I think, just as easy to get into crypto as someone who's 18. But I think on that point, it would be really interesting just to ask everyone, like in terms of changes that you've seen in the crypto space, as we do have a bit more filtering through of demographics and stuff, especially you, Nick, if you're hiring and stuff. Is that something that you've noticed changing a lot as we kind of have a change in demographics?
Yeah, I mean, our team's is all super young. Well, not all super young. It's a kind of a mix. There's a bit. It's either very young or older.
Middle-aged.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think it's generally, it's a kind of societal pressure that drives this stuff rather than people being in regulators. If there's demand in the market and people want stuff, generally that will filter up to politicians because they like being elected. So whether that is, you know, any of the big macros of the last 30 years, you know, equal rights for women, you know, you can literally go through any of the big kind of movements of the last 50 years. Eventually, they start off being bashed up by the authorities, and then there's kind of an acceptance and an accommodation, and then the people that have driven those movements end up being in power, and it ends up becoming the norm or becoming closer to the norm. So there definitely is there's definitely a point here where kind of you know, younger people, I would say, believe in broadly in a kind of democratization of finance and a more equal kind of dispersal of wealth, etc., necessarily rather than crypto. Crypto, DeFi is an enabler of that, because again, most people don't give two hoots about the technology, they just want to know what the outcomes are. So if crypto and DeFi is a driver of a more kind of equitable financial state across the board, then that will be what becomes the norm, and that will be what drives policy, and it will be what drives politicians getting re-elected, and that's always been the way of things.
We've maybe got time for maybe two more questions. Larry, just the gentleman to your right. Or your left, sorry.
Hi there. So my question is more or less two-pronged. It's in regards to the implications of GRC on an institutional level, but also from a talent acquisition perspective. So Iona, earlier on, you alluded to the fact that on an institutional level, I think institutional investors are going to play a key role in the movement and the industry as a whole. And what I like with institutional grade custodians like Fireblocks, BitGo, for example, is with their native MPC solutions, they've alleviated a lot of the problems that we see on the institutional side in relation to private key storage. However, from a GRC perspective, a lot of the scrutiny does seem to be on the infrastructure and security level. And I think if we look at the UK demographic, for an example, companies like Copper have had to do quite a lot of significant layoffs recently. And that's impacted on their ability to deliver for their investors. So do you see a scenario whereby the current approach being taken to regulation in the UK is going to detract from our involvement in that market? But also from a talent perspective, and maybe Nick might be able to give a bit more insight to this, is that going to have an impact on the amount of talent looking to move into the space because of that uncertainty in relation to regulation?
Could you just give us a little bit of background as well as to what GRC is, just before you answer?
I want to actually answer. You remember when I mentioned Brexit,
Yeah.
and I said it was a no-brainer that the UK is not at the forefront of promoting crypto? The same thing applies when it comes to custody and banks not offering it. So, Fireblocks is great. You have many other types of solutions. However, this is where traditional global banks could step in and actually ensure. That's what they know how to do. They've been custodying clients' money forever. So this is another angle where I could see a hybridization of crypto and TradFi, basically. I was part of the first custody project that was launched by Citigroup in 2017. And I'm sorry to speak badly about my former colleagues, but it's still a project. So it hasn't been offered as a solution. And I don't understand why. Because then they have the regulatory know-how. They don't need to go through the regulatory hoops. They don't need to go through the burden of overregulation. They can provide those solutions, and then other crypto-native solutions can work alongside that. But it would be much easier. So to your point, to your question about what was the question, if regulation will prevent.
I would say more so detract from the work that these seemingly good custodians are actually doing to secure the assets of their investors.
I don't think so. I don't think so. But like I said, I do believe that we are in the ideal ecosystem would be one where you have crypto-native solutions alongside solutions offered by the institutions that have been doing it for over 100 years. And I think that would calm the regulators down. I don't think custody has been primarily a focus of regulators so far. There are security issues that have arisen.
Yeah, I think the security issues are more in relation to GDPR, ISO 27001 standards, and SOC 2 from that perspective.
Exactly.
But I think with that, we've seen a lot of restructuring going on at these companies offering these solutions, which has impacted on their ability, I think, a little bit.
Yeah, I don't think it's not. I don't think it's just regulation. I think it's the effect of the
combination.
overall bear market. But like I said, I hope the banks step in. I hope Citi puts that project out there because the people behind it are extremely smart, crypto knowledgeable, actually, folks. And they were the first to even look at it. And now Morgan Stanley is, I think, out with the custody project. So, yeah, the way to temper regulation is by utilizing already regulated solutions in conjunction with the other that the market offers. I don't know.
No, I'd just say that every tier one bank in the world is either launching or looking at a custody solution for digital assets. The issue has been monetization. You know, they have a pretty well-grooved way of monetizing traditional assets that they custody, and that's been a bit more opaque with digital assets because of the volatility. So I think that it's on the radar. Most of them are trying something or testing something in the space. Some of them have got it out the door. And look, I think from if you're a large corporate, I don't know, let's say you're, I don't know, pick a large corporate. Let's say you're Philips, okay, and you decided that you want to hold loads of crypto on your balance sheet. If you could hold it with IMG, or you could hold it with HSBC, or you could hold it with copper. You're going to hold it with HSBC because of all the bank guarantees around it, and because of the evolved way that and because of their balance sheet. So I think you probably will have both. You have crypto-specific custodians. You have the Fidelities and the State Streets who service asset managers who need to be independent, even if they're just white labeling somebody else's solution. That's another thing. And then you have the banks custodying it as well, but they haven't yet completely worked out how they're going to make money out of it in the way that they have custodying normal assets.
Because banks make money out of inefficiencies.
Of course, right, yeah.
And I think the closest example when it comes to that hybridization is Coinbase custody. Because they're a publicly listed company, they're now heavily regulated, and they also maintain that crypto angle. So I think what Coinbase is offering is probably close to what we want to see as an ecosystem. And I completely agree with what Nick was saying. It doesn't only apply to corporations. I think it also applies to institutional players in crypto who know that a bank has been doing that, like I said, since 100 years. So they know how to do it. It's probably safer there. And the regulators are going to make sure it's safer there. Why? Because those banks are systemically important.
Right.
And Erica, did you have something else?
I was just going to add, it's a huge risk thing. So we've been into pretty much every bank over the last 6 months or so. They're all looking at, can we learn about this? Can we see what our options are relating to crypto? And how do we do this risk-free? You can't really do crypto risk-free, but banks are hiring out of crypto companies. Companies are hiring massively out of traditional finance. You've got new industries such as digital asset insurance now and so forth. So more and more it's becoming interrelated. So I do think we'll get to a stage where it's not like DeFi or crypto, whatever. It's just FI, like emerged. Yeah.
We won't be alive, none of us, when that happens. It's going to take a while.
And I think we've got time for one final question. So if anybody has one final question, yep, Mary, just behind you. Thank you. It's absolutely roasted under that light.
It often feels like government and the agencies are sort of pulling in different directions when it comes to policy. I'm just wondering whether advocating for a position like a crypto or a blockchain czar, or even a dedicated kind of ministerial portfolio, would be a sort of an effective and efficient direction of attack when it comes to policy and regulation.
I'm actually going to ask Jess initially to kind of comment on that question, because I think that's probably a space that you're quite comfortable.
Yeah, I mean, I think the problem with ministers is, as we've all seen, ministers move around a lot, and so. There's two problems. The first is that ministers move around a lot, so getting someone to actually understand things really deeply is hard. Ministers, at the end of the day, they're not actually they're meant to know what their subject matter is, but more than anything, they're department managers, because normally they're not in post for long enough to get a really, really deep technical understanding, and nor is it a good use of their time when they have a whole team of civil servants and they have a whole team behind them that are doing the technical stuff. So I think that's one thing that's hard with ministers. I think the other thing that's difficult is if we look at crypto at the moment as a sort of like percentage of GDP, it's really, really small. And so there's no reason why the government would want a crypto minister when they don't have like a haulage minister, or they don't have like a whiskey minister. They don't have any of this sort of gambling. Exactly. We don't have a gambling minister. And so I think it's kind of unrealistic to expect them to have a minister for such a small industry. I think in terms of politics, a lot of politicians, and they have to because they cover so many subject areas, have to go off of vibes. And so I think it's much more important to create a more positive image of the crypto space and actually to play by the rules and to embrace what regulation there is before we can really start to go mainstream and get political adoption. So I think in terms of political strategy, I think fighting on small technical points that have very clear outcomes in terms of tax rules or FCA rules, I think that's a great strategy. And I also think the more kind of overall piece of actually being really proud of our industry, because it provides jobs, it creates new technology, solves real-world problems, and being much more practically positive about what crypto can do rather than just looking down at people that don't invest in crypto at the moment.
Does anybody else have anything to add as we close? Well, listen, I would like to thank absolutely every single one of you in the room for coming along tonight. I'd also like to thank our fantastic speakers. So I'd like to put your hands together for Nick, Erica and Iona and our lovely Jess. Thank you. Please do feel free to stay and network and chat with your peers. It's been a fantastic evening. We're absolutely delighted to have you all here. We are planning another event. We're hoping it will be sometime in September. So if you have booked a ticket for this one, you will be automatically sent some details of that. I have your information and I will use it. We would just like you to know that there will be other events. We're absolutely delighted that this launch has gone so spectacularly well, and that's fundamentally for you guys turning up. So we really appreciate it. So thank you very much and have a lovely evening.
Thank you.
Could I just before everyone leaves, I just wanted to add one last comment, which is that our lovely Jason is not here tonight. I promised him I'd give him a shout out. So Jason has been fantastic, organised all of this, and day to day is absolutely fantastic accountant in the crypto space, and I've learned everything I know about crypto from him. So big shout out to Jason.
Woo, Jason.